You may have heard the term catfish for the first time while watching MTV's show Catfish when it premiered in 2012. The inspiration for the show came from the 2010 movie named Catfish. There have been plenty of videos on social media showing people catfishing others and calling themselves a catfish after showing a before and after with hair and makeup done. But a catfish or being catfished to others isn't just a funny video online. It's an elaborate scam that can ruin lives. We've all heard the jokes about the Nigerian prince asking for money from everyone they possibly can on Facebook or really any other social media. However, scams like this have evolved and become more elaborate. These scams are also being referred to as romance scams. There are plenty of videos out there if you just quickly search for them on YouTube of different examples of these scams. You may be wondering how to protect yourself from these and what red flags to look for. In today's video, I'll be going over these scams, red flags, and how to protect yourself along with some examples of these scams. Let's get into it.
Six years ago, our next guest, Ava, thought she had met the man of her dreams when she sparked up an online friendship with a stranger, calling himself David.
Yeah, but soon David started asking for money and Ava's dream turned into a nightmare. She ultimately transferred tens of thousands of pounds before realising David wasn't in fact David.
Sunny watched in horror as her life savings disappeared before her eyes.
Last year, more than 60,000 people fell for romance scams in the US, sending love interests more than $1 billion. Debbie Fox's case is included in that number.
But when looking for love, it's important to stay vigilant. Like last year in the UK, a staggering £92 million was lost to romance scams, which is sadly something our next guests have experienced firsthand.
Has raised concern of a rise in romance scams around the country. The scammers target unsuspecting women who are looking for love and swindle them of their money.
About romance scams, according to the FCTC, more than $1.3 billion was lost in these kinds of scams last year. And this morning, one woman is sharing her heartbreaking story so others don't fall victim.
When talking about catfishing or catfish, you might think of two different things. The first might be someone who may exploit the person on the other end emotionally, and they're talking to a completely fake person. The second thing you might think of is the romance scams that, while still use the same method of catfishing, but in this situation they exploit you not just emotionally, but also financially. In both instances, I do believe the people are scammers, whether it be just for fun to be able to manipulate a person or situation, or for financial purposes. In some cases, maybe even both. Basically, what this catfish does is they create a fake identity and will get you to trust them by creating a friendship or maybe in some other cases, more of a relationship. According to the FTC, it was reported a record $547 million in losses to romance scams in 2021. That's up about 80% from the reports the FTC got in 2020. In 2021, people reported paying romance scammers more with gift cards than with any other payment method. The 2020 reports also showed that cryptocurrency payments were the most costly. In 2022, nearly 70,000 people reported a romance scam, and reported losses hit a staggering $1.3 billion. The median reported loss was $4,400. Some people may wonder, well, how could someone possibly fall for something like this? But there are so many things out there where the same question arises. How do people get involved in cults? How do people get involved in multi-level marketing companies? And I could keep going, but these are just things that I've talked about on my channel. The answer usually is people are in a vulnerable state, or they just aren't paying attention to the red flags, or maybe even a little bit of both. Just recently, I made a 2-part series about the Alamo cult, and in there, I talked about how the Alamo set up a rehab facility for substance abuse, and as messed up as it is to say this, these people were the perfect targets. They were most likely promised help, community, a job, and all they had to do was be part of the cult. These people target certain age groups as well. Well, let me rephrase that. They kind of target everyone, but the older generation is a little bit easier to target for these particular scams and just scams in general. So what will a catfish do once you trust them? According to one source, they state, quote, embarrass, humiliate, or upset you by sharing your secrets online or revealing to others that you fell for their trick. Scam you into sending them money, pressure or groom you into sending nudes or getting online, blackmail you over these nudes or intimate images or videos, sometimes known as extortion, steal your identity using information you shared with them, end quote. After reading that, what's scary is the same can happen with people you know and some you may even know really well. That very same source stated that catfishing usually happens in several steps. The first is a catfish creates a fake account. They will make up their background story and will even sometimes include fake photos, schools, jobs, and friends. In some more extreme cases, they might even pretend to be a celebrity or someone famous. In some cases, they may even hack into a real person's account and impersonate them. The second is the photos they send, they will claim are theirs. But if you ask to video chat, they may come up with an excuse stating that their camera is broken, or they might need to conceal their identity for purposes such as being in the military and having to keep their face hidden. Third is they may flatter you by basically love bombing you. They may give you lots of compliments and affection, and in some cases, gifts. This makes you feel like they might truly care for you. Lastly, when the catfish finally gets you to trust them, they may start asking you for things. This may include asking you to tell them your secrets, sharing personal identifiable information, such as your birthday, home address, and details about your family. They might ask for you to lend or give them money or cryptocurrency, maybe even purchasing gift cards for them. They might ask you to receive a money transfer or an item and send it to someone else. Sending an intimate image or video such as nudes might be the next thing they ask for as well. This is most likely so they can do something called sextortion later on. Here's the thing though, a lot of information about you can be easily found on your social media profiles. Let's use Facebook for example, which I've seen a lot of these scammers using Facebook, but let's use that platform as an example. Your profile can be public or private, but certain information might also be public that you have to update in your settings to make private. Your birthday might be listed on Facebook along with your current location, meaning where you live, where you have lived, what your name is, who your significant other is if you have one. Then there's whatever you choose to share on your Facebook as well. The names of other family members, you might even list them in the family member section of your profile. Your job may be listed on your profile. Then you have your photos on there as well, which can be saved, for example, profile pictures. My profile on there is private. My name is not my actual name. I don't share photos of my child's face. I don't share personal details about family members on there either. After having someone find me from my YouTube channel and me accepting them because at the time they were harmless, well, turned out to be the farthest thing from harmless. But after that situation, I locked down my profile even more. What I will say though is nowadays, if I don't know you, I'm not accepting you. All of that to say that a lot of information that these scammers need, whether it be for just a catfish or for a full-blown scam, is possibly all on your profile, so they might even be able to skip a bunch of steps. When you're on social media, you need to be aware of your digital footprint. In the next few sections, I'll start going over some red flags and how to avoid these scams, and after that, I'll go over some cases of these scams happening in real life. There are so many lies and red flags to look for when coming into contact with a romance scammer. The FTC shared this graph that I currently have up on the screen about romance scammers and their favorite lies by the actual statistics. So what might be some red flags that you're dealing with a catfishing scam artist? I'm sure this one is pretty obvious, but a fake dating profile, or just a fake profile in general if it's not for dating app purposes. You might be wondering, how would you know if it's fake or not? Some are painfully obvious, but if you can't tell, they'll most likely have a profile picture that is almost too good to be true when it comes to being attractive. They will also use stock images or photoshopped ones. There won't be very many photos on their profile along with friends. The scammer's location, as in where they live, most likely won't be near you. Now, some people who check these boxes might not be scammers either. I know of some people in my personal life who really only use their profiles to follow others or be friends with their family members. They might use avatars instead of actual photos because they're trying to stay under the radar on social media. However, in my opinion, if you feel as though something isn't right, it most likely isn't. Plus, the people who are trying to stay under the radar on social media aren't actively going out to be friends with people. Anyway, back to the red flags. Coming on strong is another one. Basically, if this person is trying to move really quickly and declaring their love for you very early on, along with promises of marriage, it's an indication that they're a scammer. Love bombing is used in so many cults and multi-level marketing companies, but also these romance scammers will do the same thing. If you don't know what love bombing is, the Wikipedia definition is love bombing is an attempt to influence a person by demonstrations of attention and affection. It can be used in different ways and for either positive or negative purposes. Psychologists have identified love bombing as a possible part of a cycle of abuse and have warned against it. Another red flag when it comes to these romance scams is they will ask you to leave whatever platform or website you're talking to each other on. This is so that you're no longer protected, especially on a dating site. When on dating sites, there sometimes might be policies where people can't ask for your personal information. So these scammers will ask you to switch to a site like WhatsApp or maybe even Telegram. It might not necessarily be someone trying to scam you when it comes to switching platforms, but you shouldn't start sharing any types of private details about yourself or your life just in case. In my opinion, if someone can't respect you wanting to keep certain things private, if they're not a scammer, then they might not be that great of a person either. Respecting boundaries and just respecting another person should be common practice, especially when getting to know someone. If these scammers avoid video calls, this might also be a sign of their scamming ways. They might try to set something up and then come up with an excuse of why they can't do a video chat. However, if one goes ahead with a video chat, even if the person on the other end won't show their face, be careful. There might be something in your background that might be identifying, or a look into your life. Some scammers might also be able to hack into the camera and record or spy on you. In addition to not video chatting, these people might ask to meet up and then make up some kind of an excuse as to why they can't. Probably one of the biggest red flags is when they start asking you for money when they haven't even met you. According to the FTC, they created the graph that is currently up on the screen about the top payment methods on romance scams in 2022. It usually starts out in small amounts and they work their way up to larger amounts. These romance scammers will obviously tell a bunch of lies and exaggerate stories. A way to know if you're being scammed is if they ask for help on purchasing something, like a computer so that they can work or study, or to purchase plane tickets to visit. They might ask for help in paying for medical treatment or to help them with an investment. There are some common phrases that these scammers use, and according to one source, those are, quote, "I'll pay you back. I can't video call. We're so alike. Trust me. I've fallen for you. I can't wait to be with you. But my bank account's frozen," end quote. Now, those phrases might also not be a scammer, because if you have people in your life, they might say things like this too. However, if all of the red flags are kind of adding up and you hear those terms, it might be time for you to start paying attention a little bit more, and definitely don't give them any money, in my opinion, of course. I think the obvious statement would be to be cautious online and don't trust everyone that you talk to, especially if you haven't met them in person yet. According to one source, here are 10 tips on how to outsmart a romance scammer. 1. Stay on the platform you started speaking to each other on. 2. Don't assume that this person is safe. 3. Look them up online, verifying their background and cross-checking online profiles, which is interesting given the many memes that I've seen about how you or your bestie are like FBI investigators on social media after starting to date someone or something along those lines. 4. Do an image search. You can do a reverse image search on any pictures on their profile. This will show you if they're using any stock images or someone else's images. 5. Keep your guard up. Be wary of overly complimentary messages and search for them online to see if they appear as known scripts on any romance scam sites. 6. Take your time and ask lots of questions. This can help you look for any inconsistencies in their stories. 7. Get a second opinion by speaking with a friend or family member, someone who you're close with. 8. Meet up in person, whether that be in public or a video call. If someone avoids showing you their face, it might be a romance scam. Meet in a public space and avoid traveling too far to meet someone in person. Also, I'll add to let someone know where you are and maybe even share your location with them. 9. Don't trust unknown links or downloads. We all know about how scammers use malicious links or send malware in messages, but people still fall for this. 10. Don't send money. This might seem like a no-brainer to some people, but to others, they're in a vulnerable position, which is why they fall victim to these scammers. Also, make sure to report the scammer if you can to the FTC. You can report them anonymously if you're worried about them finding out that it was you. This is a darker side of romance scams and how they relate to human trafficking. The victim stories that I'll be going over later are all based in the United States, but Americans aren't the only people falling victim to these scams. According to an article on the Homeland Security website, they stated that in some cases, the scammers are victims of human trafficking themselves. They are forced to work for no pay, they're sleep deprived, and cannot leave. Quote, "The global COVID-19 pandemic left many people financially devastated and desperate for hope. In many cases, victims respond to online ads promising employment overseas with high salaries. People with certain skill sets are especially targeted, such as those with English and/or Chinese language proficiency. Then they are deceived and arrive at a secure compound comprised of fraud dens that are run by criminal organizations. Their passports are confiscated, and they are forced to pay back their debt by working long hours. They also face physical and sexual abuse, restrictions on movement, and starvation. Many of these fraud dens are in countries with pervasive government and law enforcement corruption. However, online fraud scams are highly profitable, and this crime model is quickly spreading throughout the world. End quote. I do think that some of these scammers might be forced to scam people, but I do also believe there are people out there who are doing it willingly. Now that you know the background of these catfishing or romance scams, let's talk about some of these scammers in particular and go over some cases where they've actually been caught and justice has been served. It's important to hear about actual stories from real people because it shows that these scams do exist. It's not some urban legend or a myth. People have lost so much money. Some people watching this may not understand how this is even possible, but as I've said so many times on this channel, they target vulnerable people. Also, just to add, these scams happen to both men and women, and there are some people out there who even believe that they're dating celebrities. But let's get into the first story. The first one I'll be going over happened in Boston. A man by the name of Francis Okafor, who was 30 years old and was sentenced on January 11, 2023 by U.S. Senior District Judge Douglas P. Woodlock to 2 years in prison and 2 years of supervised release. He was also ordered to pay restitution of $1.1 million. But why did he get sentenced to prison and ordered to pay restitution? He pled guilty to 1 count of bank fraud conspiracy. This was due to him helping to steal over $1 million from mostly elderly victims through these romance or advance fee scams. Francis was opening up bank accounts by using fake passports to receive the victims' funds, and then he would send money to his co-conspirators, according to prosecutors. Francis was working with McPherson Osemwegi, who would be sentenced in August of 2022 to 3 years in prison after opening up 16 bank accounts and using these for fake passports. The total loss was $690,000. 2 other people Francis worked with were Kelchi Ume and Mike Emigbe. Kelchi was arrested in July 2022, and Mike pleaded guilty in February 2022. The 2 of them opened up more than 30 bank accounts at 4 different banks using 10 different fake passports. The total loss was more than $1.3 million. In total, Francis opened at least 14 bank accounts at 5 different banks using 2 fake passports. According to one source, prosecutors wrote, quote, "He and his co-conspirators capitalized on lonely, often elderly, individuals' desire to find companions using promises of love to persuade victims to wire large sums of money into accounts that Francis and his co-conspirators opened using counterfeit foreign passports. Some of these victims depleted their life savings. While Okafor may not have wooed the victims, he surely understood that they were wiring large sums of money to accounts he opened in the names of individuals who did not exist." End quote. Outside of all of this, friends and family members of Francis stated he was a good friend, employee, and son-in-law. His father-in-law, Valentine Akey, did write a letter to the court. Valentine talked about first meeting Francis in 2018. He stated, quote, "Ever since I welcomed Francis into my family, I have come to study and know him as a wonderful and hardworking young man, and above all, a caring and loving husband to my daughter and father to my 2 amazing grandchildren." End quote. Valentine also wrote that the case brought pain and suffering to Francis and his family. Valentine, may I just say something here or ask you a question? What about the victims? What about their pain and suffering? I know you don't really care as much because your son-in-law's awful decision to scam people and steal over $1 million has affected your family, but he chose to steal money from innocent people. Some people he stole from were the elderly. People who just want to live out the rest of their days and not have to deal with some douche canoe scammer stealing their money. I understand that Francis has a wife and kids. I do feel awful for the wife and kids because they don't deserve to have to be put through this either. However, this was his choice. Francis attempted to get away with scamming the elderly. He brought this pain and suffering onto the family. Anyway, Valentine said, quote, "He lost his dream job after just a few months with tremendous loss of income and inability to provide for his family, loss of freedom, loss of time with his young family while in detention, and the stress associated with uncertainty." End quote. Again, this was his decision, and thanks to his stupid decision, he did lose his dream job because of his actions. There are consequences for your actions when you're being like this and stealing money. Yes, it sucks that he is now unable to provide for his family, but he knew the risks of scamming and stealing people's money. Speaking of, let's talk about some of the victims of his scams. One victim, who was a 70-year-old woman from Chicago, took her entire retirement account and sent the money from that account to Francis. Quote, this victim sent the funds under the belief that they were for a U.S. Army officer stationed overseas whom she had met online and with whom she believed she was in a romantic relationship. End quote. So did she not endure pain and suffering along with stress and losing money for just existing and thinking she was helping out someone she cared for and possibly loved? Was she not manipulated? And that's another thing. I know that some people might say that the victims also made the choice to send money. And while yes, they did, they were also manipulated into making these decisions. The next victim was a widow who was in her late 50s from Kansas. She sent about $120,000 to accounts that Francis and his co-conspirators ran. This victim also took out a loan for $60,000 using her 2 cars as collateral. Quote, the victim sent these funds at the direction of her online boyfriend, whom she met after her husband died of cancer, who told her he needed the money for his diamond expedition and that she would be paid back. The victim has been devastated by the scam and left financially vulnerable. End quote. Now let's go ahead and move on to the next example of one of these scams. As may be expected, when it comes to Alicia Bultez's story, she was 81 years old, lonely, and single for 7 years at the time that the scam she thought was a genuine relationship would start. Quote, the walls just don't talk to you, end quote, is something she said when being interviewed about this story. It was in the month of February that Alicia would get a friend request from an Army officer that was stationed overseas. Well, that's what the scammer made it look like. This officer was in his 60s, so I'm sure for an 81-year-old woman that made her feel pretty good and confident. The two of them got to know each other, and things had gone so fast that after a few months they decided to get married once he came back to the United States. Alicia said, quote, I thought, wow, I really liked the way he made me feel. I felt loved. After having 3 divorces and not feeling loved, to have someone really love me and care about me and want to do things for me, I was all open for it. End quote. This part of me researching into Alicia made my heart break for her. I almost wonder if she put any of that information on her Facebook, and if it was public where a scammer could have seen this and used it to their advantage. But it truly makes me so sad for her because she just wanted to feel loved. Unfortunately, this is where the story takes a turn for the worse. Before this person was supposed to come back from being overseas, they told Alicia that some kind of portfolio he was sending back home got stuck in customs. He had asked Alicia if there was any way she could send some money, $1,500 to be exact, to some kind of diplomat in Philadelphia. As you can probably predict, Alicia went ahead and sent it. Here's an even worse thing. Alicia's main source of income is her Social Security. This person Alicia was in a romantic relationship with, or well, so she thought, had asked for an additional $5,000 to send to customs. Alicia used her small life savings for this $5,000. Sadly, it would only get worse. This person had asked for $40,000 and she told him that she wouldn't be able to send that amount. That wasn't enough for the scammer, so they had sent her a check for $92,500. This happened a week after them asking for the $40,000. This person had asked Alicia to deposit the money in an IRA at her bank, then send the $40,000 he had originally asked for. She did what he had asked, and sadly, she found out that the check had bounced. The way she found out was she went to the bank a few days later with the Latter-day Saint Ward Relief Society president. The president was the one who insisted that they go. I cannot imagine what Alicia had felt in that moment. $40,000 is so much money, especially if you're just living off of your Social Security. My heart breaks for Alicia. She eventually figured out that she had been scammed, and she did bring all of this to the police. Quote, I was in such denial and I was hurt and I was angry and I felt all these emotions. I just put it in the Lord's hands because there's nothing more I could do about it. End quote. What's even more sad in this story is that Alicia would be scammed yet again. Only this time it was a little different. It was October when her second cousin texted her telling her to become part of a government grant program. She could get anywhere between $50,000 to $400,000 if she just called this one lawyer. She did, and she wanted to go for the lowest amount. However, she was approved for $300,000. Because of the amount, she would have to pay $17,000 in taxes and fees, which she overnighted. This check emptied out her savings, and she had to get a second mortgage in addition to bank loans. Yes, loans, as in plural. When Alicia talked to her cousin, she would find out that the text never came from her cousin. As expected, Alicia has been very overwhelmed by all of this, and she did reach out to her church for support. As far as how much they've helped her, I'm really not sure, but I cannot fathom being in her shoes. Being scammed by more than one person and losing so much is gut-wrenching. I hope that Alicia is able to get back to a good financial place, because at her age, she doesn't deserve to have to worry about all of this. This next example is something that I found on Reddit, and I know that Reddit is not a credible source, but I figured we could just share this story and kind of go over the discourse that happened afterwards. So this person posted, "My dad continues to fall for catfishing scams and is giving away all his money. My mom died in April, and my dad has given away a few $100,000 US to catfishing scams. He seems to know better, but continues to give away money. Anyone have any idea what to do?" One person said, "This is filling a need for him. Has he been seeing a therapist since your mom's death? Does he have other things to do with his time besides this?" The traditional strategies are to show the victim catfish expose videos and help them draw the connections, but that won't work if your dad knows they're catfishes and is doing it anyway. Having a talk with him, trying to get him into therapy if he's receptive, and getting him more engaged in life again may help. Unfortunately, you don't have many legal remedies unless you can prove him to be generally incompetent. The standard for that is much higher than makes terrible decisions. This man is grieving and lonely. I have known someone in the same situation who was getting scammed that knew they were being scammed, but said, "If I stop giving them money, they won't call me every day." To this person, their scammer was their social outlet and made them feel accepted and loved and worthwhile. Far more widowers seek out serious relationships or remarriage after their partner passes compared to widows, and it appears your father is no exception. The problem is that he's doing it in a very unhealthy way. He needs professional help at this point. After my father passed, we got my mom into therapy, and despite her initial resistance, it turned out to be very helpful for her. Obviously, there's more discourse to that particular Reddit thread, and I will leave a link to it in the description box below.
In this city in southwest Nigeria, everyone seems to know someone who scams Americans online.
The culture of scamming people, and that culture I think is in Nigeria, yes.
And they say it is simply because there are no other jobs.
When you've tried good, it doesn't work, you have to turn to evil.
Chris, that's the name he gave us, says that was his situation.
I have 3 elder siblings, and none of them has a job.
For 5 years, he approached American women online.
Mostly midnight. Sometimes I sleep by 5 a.m.
So you'd stay up all night doing this?
Yeah, all night, and I have to go to class by 7 a.m.
Finally, he convinced a woman from Texas that they were in love.
I spend a lot of time talking to her. She wants attention. People in America want attention.
I don't consider myself stupid, but they got me.
Laura Francis was 68 when another scammer, later traced to Nigeria, found her.
He would send beautiful sayings every morning. "Good morning, sweetheart. So happy that I met you."
But it was this question that did the trick.
"Don't you think you're worthy of being loved?" You know, and that's kind of a question I hadn't thought about.
Then the scammer began inventing financial emergencies.
How much did you end up losing?
$248,800.
I am so sorry.
I'm going to survive. I'm just not going to be able to do what I had planned on doing.
For victims, the lesson is clear.
Your alarm bell should be ringing when these new relationships, whether romantic or otherwise, start asking you for your hard-earned dollars.
Chris got only $20,000 out of his victim, but that is 10 years' salary in a country where more than half of the population lives in extreme poverty. Chris says he was so remorseful he confessed to his victim.
He cried for days, but to my surprise, she did not block me. She adopted me like a son.
And today, he consults with an American company, Social Catfish, to spot future scams. For Laura, the experience taught her about evil, she says, but also about poverty.
And they need to find jobs for these guys, and they need to give them a better way of life.
Until then, millions of young men like Chris have no better option than to look for the lonely online.
This story is heartbreaking on so many levels here. The woman that you're about to meet is a widow who was looking for companionship, but instead, she got her heart and her wallet ripped open. She says she was tricked into giving more than $70,000, her life savings, by the way, to a man she met online.
I'm out all that money, and I don't think I'll ever get it back.
76-year-old Jennifer Dennis says she met this man on Facebook who went by the name Caleb. He claimed to be a doctor working for the Red Cross in Yemen.
It all looked legitimate. He was coming back to the States real soon, and he was wanting to settle in a new area because he lost his wife.
She told our ABC station WTVD she formed a months-long online relationship with Caleb, growing so close, at one point even messaging him, "You are my dream come true." Caleb soon suggested they buy a house together when he returned from overseas. The plan? Caleb would pay $600,000 and she would pay the remaining $70,000, plus an additional $8,700 for expenses.
Seemed like a perfect deal.
She and her son Raymond then packed up their things, sold their home in Georgia, and drove to North Carolina, hoping to start a new life. But when Raymond went to look at the house, it was clearly not for sale.
When I noticed that someone was still living in the house and knocked on the door, I automatically knew that it was a scam.
Now, as for Jennifer, she and her son are now living in a donated camper, and she has reported the incident to the FBI.
Enforcement has raised concern of a rise in romance scams around the country. The scammers target unsuspecting women who are looking for love and swindle them of their money. I'm joined now by two victims of these scams, Jabulile Nxumalo and Bukelwa Mzamo, to tell us more about their ordeal. Jabulile and Bukelwa, good evening, and thank you very much for your time and for coming on this evening. Quite an ordeal, it seems, just reading your stories and what you would have gone through. Jabulile, let me begin with you. I mean, how did you come across this fellow?
Hi, Tabo. Thank you for having me. Jabulile, she works from home. She's been working from home from 2019. She doesn't like going out that much, so she spends most of her time at home. So she was like, okay, girl, you've been single for a while. Why can't you try the dating sites? I registered a profile on Tinder. I met a guy who happened to swindle me. That's how I met a person.
Yeah. And is this an immediate thing? Do you date for a while? Do you know the person a little bit better, or just meet on the dating line and I suppose a day later asking for money? How does it happen?
Oh, no, it doesn't happen like that. You meet a person, you date, you talk, you make video calls, they tell you about themselves, what they do, which happens to be lies, and you visit his house, he visits you, but then the only trick about this kind of a scam, they'll say they wouldn't reveal their true country of origin. Most of them, they're from Uganda, but they'll say they're from Rwanda or other countries. So they will say in their culture, when they meet a girl or a woman, or from the first date, they will be like, what are you looking for? And they'll be like, I'm looking for something serious, so I'm not here to play games. And then they will tell the victims that in their culture, you need to be introduced to their ancestors. The actual ancestors need to approve the relationship before they can proceed.
It's so incredibly sad knowing that there are a number of people out there who have either depleted their accounts or come close to it because of these catfishing or romance scams. They're just trying to find a place in this world and have maybe gone through some hard times. They're possibly vulnerable and being preyed upon. I'm hoping that there can eventually be some laws or regulations against these scams. Anyway, this is Monica reporting to you live from a highway. Bye!